The clock on Vincent Romano's desk read against the polished mahogany surface. He didn't recognize the number, but in his line of work, unknown calls at ungodly hours were never good news. His thumb hovered over the decline button for a split second before something, instinct perhaps, or fate, made him answer. Romano. The voice on the other end was female, professional, yet trembling with barely contained urgency. This is Nurse Patricia from St. Mary's Hospital. I'm calling about Sophia Martinez. Vincent's entire body went rigid. The glass of whiskey he'd been holding suddenly felt like lead in his hand. The name alone had the power to dismantle every carefully constructed wall he'd built around himself over 33 years of surviving in the ugliest corners of New York City. What happened? His voice came out harder than he intended, each word a bullet leaving the chamber. She's been shot, Mr. 2 bullets. She's in surgery now. But the nurse paused and Vincent could hear the chaos of the emergency room bleeding through the phone, monitors beeping, voices shouting medical jargon, the mechanical whoosh of ventilators. She's been saying your name over and over. You're the only contact we found in her personal effects, aside from her mother, who's in Puerto Rico and can't get here until morning. Vincent was already standing, his chair scraping violently against the floor. His men, scattered throughout the private club where he'd been conducting business, immediately straightened to attention. Angelo, his second in command, moved toward him with questioning eyes. I'm on my way, Vincent said into the phone, his tone brooking no argument. You keep her alive. Whatever it takes. Money is no object. Get the best surgeons in the city. I don't care if you have to drag them out of their beds. Do you understand me? Yes, sir. But Mr. Romano, there's something else you should know. Tell me in person. I'll be there in 10 minutes. He ended the call and looked at Angelo. Clear my schedule, everything. I don't care if the mayor himself is waiting. Cancel it. Boss, what's Sophia's been shot? The name meant nothing to most of his crew, but Angelo had been with Vincent long enough to recognize the shift in his boss's demeanor. In all their years together, Angelo had never seen Vincent Romano afraid. Angry, yes. Ruthless, certainly, but never afraid until now. The drive to St. Mary's Hospital took exactly 8 minutes. Vincent's driver, Carlos, broke every traffic law in existence. The black Mercedes weaving through the sparse late-night traffic like a shark cutting through water. Vincent sat in the back seat, his hands clenched into fists, his jaw tight enough to crack teeth. His mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each more violent than the last. Who would dare? Who would be stupid enough, bold enough to touch her? Sophia Martinez had entered his life 6 months ago under circumstances that still haunted his dreams. Give it to the hospital if you want, she'd said. But I didn't save your nephew for money. I saved him because that's what I do. That's what we all should do. In that moment, Vincent Romano, a man who built an empire on the principle that everything and everyone had a price, encountered someone who couldn't be bought. The realization had been both terrifying and intoxicating. After that, he'd found excuses to return to St. Mary's. Anonymous donations that somehow always ended up funding the pediatric wing. New equipment that mysteriously appeared in Sophia's unit. He'd even attended a hospital fundraiser, something so far outside his usual sphere that his men had thought he'd lost his mind. But it had given him the chance to see her in a different environment. To watch her laugh with colleagues. To observe the way children lit up when she entered a room. He'd never approached her directly again. He wasn't sure why. Perhaps some buried instinct of self-preservation. Or maybe the recognition that someone like Sophia Martinez deserved better than the blood-stained world he inhabited. She was light, and he was darkness. And darkness had no business corrupting light. But now someone had shot her. Someone had dared to touch what he'd silently, impossibly claimed as his. The Mercedes screeched to a halt outside St. Mary's emergency entrance. Vincent was out of the car before it fully stopped. Angelo close on his heels with 4 additional men fanning out to secure the perimeter. The automatic doors parted before him like the Red Sea. And the hospital staff took one look at the man in the $3,000 suit with murder in his eyes and wisely stepped aside. Where is she? Vincent demanded of the first nurse he encountered. Sir, you can't just Sophia Martinez. Where is she? The nurse's eyes widened with recognition. Not of him personally, but of the type of man he was. The type who made demands, not requests. Surgery, 3rd floor, but only family. Vincent was already moving toward the elevators, his men forming a protective V behind him. A security guard made the mistake of stepping into his path, one hand raised in a placating gesture. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to." Angelo smoothly intercepted, flashing something that might have been a badge, but definitely wasn't. Whatever he said was low and fast, and the guard's face went pale before he stepped aside without another word. The third-floor surgical wing was a maze of sterile corridors and harsh fluorescent lighting. Vincent emerged from the elevator to find Nurse Patricia waiting for him. A woman in her 50s with kind eyes and the bearing of someone who'd seen too much suffering to be easily rattled. "Romano," she said, her voice steady despite the circumstances. "Richardson is still in surgery with Sophia. It's been 2 hours so far. Tell me what happened." "Everything." Patricia glanced at the small army of men filling the hallway behind Vincent, then seemed to make a decision. "Follow me. We can talk in the family consultation room." The room was depressingly familiar. Neutral colors, boxes of tissue strategically placed, furniture designed to be comfortable enough for long waits, but not so comfortable that people would want to stay. Vincent had been in rooms like this before, delivering news that would shatter families. Now he was on the other side of that equation. Sophia was leaving her shift at 11:30. Patricia began once they were seated. She always parks in the west lot because it's closer to the pediatric wing. According to witnesses, there was a black SUV waiting near her car. 2 men got out. There was an argument. Witnesses say Sophia looked frightened but was trying to stay calm. Then Patricia's voice cracked slightly. Then someone else arrived. A man in a suit. The 2 men from the SUV drew weapons. Sophia tried to run. That's when the shots were fired. Vincent's blood ran cold. "How many shots?" "5 in total. 2 hit Sophia. 1 in the shoulder. 1 in the abdomen. The others." Patricia took a breath. "The others hit the man in the suit. He's in surgery, too. Critical condition." "Who was he?" "We don't know yet. No ID on him. The police think Sophia might have witnessed something. They're treating this as a targeted hit, not a random attack." Vincent's mind was already racing through possibilities. A targeted hit near St. Two shooters. A third man who'd apparently tried to intervene, or maybe was the actual target. This had the fingerprints of organization written all over it. But whose organization? "The police want to talk to you," Patricia added carefully. "They know you have connections to Sophia." "Let them wait," Vincent said flatly. His connections to Sophia were minimal, peripheral, carefully maintained from a distance. But in his world, even minimal connections could be dangerous. Had someone found out about his interest in her? Was this a message, a challenge, or worse? Had his presence in her life, however distant, somehow painted a target on her back? The thought made his hands curl into fists so tight his knuckles went white. If that was true, if his darkness had somehow reached out and touched her light, then every single person responsible would learn what true darkness meant. "I need to see her the moment she's out of surgery," Vincent said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Of course. Romano, you should know the damage was extensive. Sophia will be safe there while she recovers. Here, she's a sitting duck." "Even if what you're saying is true," Dr. Richardson argued, though his conviction was clearly wavering, "the medical risk of transport alone will be minimized by the private ambulance with advanced life support that's already en route." Angelo interjected smoothly from his position by the door. "ETA 15 minutes. Full medical team on board, including a trauma surgeon in case of complications during transit." Richardson looked between Vincent and Angelo, realization dawning in his eyes. "You'd already decided this before you even spoke to me." "I'm not asking for permission, Doctor," Vincent said, his tone gentling slightly. "I'm asking for your cooperation to make this as safe as possible for Sophia. You care about her. I can see that. Everyone who works with Sophia cares about her. So help me protect her." There was a long moment of silence broken only by the ambient sounds of the hospital. Distant announcements over the PA system, the squeak of wheels on linoleum, the hushed conversations of medical staff changing shifts. Finally, Dr. Richardson, the sound of a man recognizing defeat when it was inevitable. "I'll need to see your facility's credentials," he said. "And I want medical personnel from our team to accompany her during transport and stay with her for at least the first 24 hours. Vincent agreed immediately. "Send whoever you trust. They'll have full access to Sophia and all our resources. And if she deteriorates during transport, we bring her back here immediately." No arguments. Agreed. Richardson shook his head slowly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was consenting to. Give me 20 minutes to prepare her for transport and brief my team. And Mr. Romano, if anything happens to that woman because of this decision, credentials and resources be damned. I will make it my life's mission to destroy you. Vincent met the doctor's eyes without flinching. If anything happens to her, doctor, you won't need to. I'll do it myself. Richardson disappeared back into the ICU to prepare Sophia for transport. Vincent turned to Angelo. I want a complete security detail at the facility. 3 teams rotating 8-hour shifts. Nobody gets in or out without my personal approval. And get Rico working on identifying those shooters. I want names, addresses, family members, favorite coffee shops, everything. Already on it, boss. Angelo confirmed, tapping rapidly on his phone. But there's something else you need to know. The police are here. Detectives. They're not asking nicely anymore about talking to you. Vincent's jaw tightened. Police involvement was inevitable, but inconvenient. The last thing he needed was cops stumbling through his investigation, potentially tipping off whoever was behind the attack. But refusing to cooperate entirely would only make them more suspicious. Where are they? Waiting room, main floor. Detectives Sarah Kim and Michael Morrison. Kim's been with NYPD for 15 years. Morrison for 8. I'll follow in my car. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away with a police escort that Angelo had somehow arranged, Vincent felt the weight of the past few hours finally settling on his shoulders. He was exhausted, but knew sleep wouldn't come even if he tried. There was too much to do, too many pieces to move into position. The detectives are getting restless, Angelo said, appearing at his elbow. And the sun's coming up. If we're going to talk to them, we should do it now before they decide to make this difficult. Vincent glanced at his watch. 5:47 a.m. In another life, he might have been waking up now, preparing for a day of legitimate business, coffee, shower, reviewing the morning news. Instead, he was covered in the sterile smell of hospitals, running on adrenaline and rage, about to talk to police about a shooting he had nothing to do with, but everything to gain from solving. Get the lawyers on a conference call, he instructed, and make sure they understand. I'm cooperating fully with this investigation. I want whoever hurt Sophia found and prosecuted. He paused, a cold smile touching his lips. Well, found at least. What happens after that depends on how quickly the police move. Angelo understood immediately. If the police found the shooters first, there would be arrests, trials, the slow machinery of justice. If Vincent found them first, well, there would still be justice, just a different, faster kind. They made their way to the main floor waiting room where detectives Kim and Morrison had been cooling their heels for the better part of an hour. Kim was a compact Asian woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, her dark hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. Morrison was taller, broad-shouldered, with the kind of tired look that came from too many years seeing humanity at its worst. Both detectives stood as Vincent entered, their body language professional but wary. They knew who he was. Everyone in law enforcement knew the Romano name, even if they couldn't prove half the things they suspected. Romano, Kim began, her tone carefully neutral. Thank you for agreeing to speak with us. I'm Detective Kim. This is Detective Morrison. We'd like to ask you some questions about Sofia Martinez and the shooting that occurred in the hospital parking lot last night. Of course, Detective, Vincent replied smoothly, gesturing to the chairs. Though I should tell you up front, I wasn't present during the incident, and I'm not sure how much help I can be. Let's start with your relationship to Ms. Martinez, Morrison said, pulling out a notebook. Hospital staff say you've been a regular visitor here over the past few months. Anonymous donations, equipment purchases, attendance at fundraisers. That's a significant investment for someone who claims to barely know the victim. I wouldn't say I barely know her. Vincent corrected. Sophia saved my nephew's life 6 months ago. I'm grateful. The donations were my way of showing that gratitude to the hospital and the pediatric unit where she works. Nothing more complicated than that. Kim leaned forward slightly. And yet, when she was shot, you were called. Her phone had you listed as an emergency contact under the name Vincent. Not Mr. Romano or Angelo's uncle or anything that would indicate a distant professional relationship, just Vincent. That suggests something more personal. Vincent kept his expression neutral, though internally he felt a jolt at this information. Sophia had listed him as an emergency contact. When had she done that, and why? They'd barely spoken beyond polite pleasantries in the hospital corridors. "I'm as surprised as you are, Detective," he said honestly. "Sophia and I have only had a handful of conversations. Perhaps she had a reason I'm not aware of. Or perhaps you were closer than you're admitting," Morrison suggested, his tone implying things Vincent didn't appreciate. Before Vincent could respond to the implication in Detective Morrison's tone, his lawyer arrived. Margaret O'Brien, senior partner at O'Brien and Bingham, a woman whose reputation for aggressive defense made prosecutors wheeze and judges groan. She swept into the waiting room like a force of nature wrapped in a charcoal pantsuit, her silver hair perfectly styled despite the early hour. "Detectives," she said crisply, not bothering with pleasantries. "Margaret O'Brien representing Mr. I understand you have questions, but before we proceed, I need to clarify something important. My client is here voluntarily out of concern for Ms. Martinez and a genuine desire to help your investigation. He is not a suspect. He has committed no crime, and any suggestion to the contrary will result in this conversation ending immediately. Are we clear?" Detective Kim's expression didn't change, but Vincent caught the slight tightening around her eyes. Nobody liked being managed by expensive lawyers, but Kim was professional enough to recognize the game. "Crystal clear, Miss O'Brien. We simply want to understand Mr. Romano's connection to the victim and whether he might have any information that could help us identify the shooters." "Then let's proceed on that basis," Margaret said, settling into a chair and nodding at Vincent to continue. "As I was saying," Vincent resumed, "Sophia and I are not close in the way your question implied, Detective Morrison, but I have tremendous respect for her. She's dedicated, compassionate, and exceptionally good at what she does. When my nephew was dying, she fought for him like he was her own family. That kind of person is rare in any world, let alone in a place as overwhelmed and underfunded as a public hospital. So, yes, I made donations. And yes, I've been back to the hospital multiple times, but not to pursue Sophia romantically or for any other personal agenda, simply to support the work she does." "Noble sentiments," Morrison said, his skepticism evident. "But you'll forgive us for being thorough. In our experience, when someone with your background takes an interest in a civilian, it rarely ends well for the civilian." Margaret's hand came down sharply on the table. "Detective, that borders on slander. My client's background consists of legitimate business interests in import-export, real estate, and hospitality. If you have evidence of criminal activity, charge him. If not, stick to questions relevant to this investigation." Kim shot her partner a warning look before turning back to Vincent. "Let's approach this differently. Romano, do you have any idea why someone would target Sophia Martinez? Any enemies she might have mentioned? Any unusual incidents or threats in recent weeks?" Vincent shook his head. "Sophia doesn't have enemies, Detective. She's a pediatric nurse. She spends her days saving children and comforting worried parents. The very concept of someone wanting to hurt her is absurd. And yet someone did," Kim pointed out. "Two professional shooters in a hospital parking lot. This wasn't random. The preliminary investigation suggests Sophia may have witnessed something significant enough to warrant silencing her. This aligned with what Nurse Patricia had mentioned earlier." "What kind of something?" Morrison consulted his notebook. "We're still piecing that together, but there's a complication. The third victim, Michael Torino, the attorney who was also shot. He's connected to a case involving Senator William Bradford. Torino was preparing to testify before a grand jury about financial irregularities in some of the senator's campaign funding." Vincent's mind immediately began connecting dots. Senator Bradford was a political fixture in New York, 3 terms in office, chairman of several influential committees, and widely rumored to have connections to various criminal enterprises. If Torino was preparing to testify against him, and if Sophia had somehow witnessed something related to that. "You think the hit was meant for Torino," Vincent said slowly, "and Sophia was collateral damage." "That's one theory," Kim confirmed. "Though, there's another possibility. Hospital security footage shows Sophia arriving at her car first. Torino appeared maybe 30 seconds later. The shooters were already in position, waiting. It's possible Sophia saw something she shouldn't have. Maybe the shooters getting into position. Maybe some kind of preliminary setup. And Torino's arrival simply complicated what was supposed to be a clean elimination of a witness." The thought made Vincent's blood run cold. Sophia hadn't been collateral damage. She'd been the primary target, at least initially, which meant the threat wasn't over. Once whoever ordered the hit discovered she'd survived. "Detective," Vincent said carefully, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. How secure is your investigation? Are you confident that information about Sophia's condition won't leak to whoever ordered this hit?" Kim and Morrison exchanged glances. "We're keeping details close," Kim said. "But in a hospital setting with dozens of staff, complete information control is impossible. Because if I were the person who ordered this and I found out my target survived, I'd try again immediately, before she can wake up and identify the shooters or testify about what she saw." "Your facility," Morrison said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's why you moved her. You're not just providing better medical care. You're hiding her. I'm protecting her. There's a difference. And before you object on legal grounds, Sophia is not a prisoner. She's a patient receiving world-class medical treatment in a secure location. The moment she wakes up and wants to leave, she's free to do so. But until then, I'm making damn sure nobody gets a second chance at killing her." Margaret placed a restraining hand on Vincent's arm, a silent reminder to be careful about what he said. But for once, Vincent didn't care about legal exposure. The police needed to understand the stakes. "Detectives," Margaret interjected smoothly, "my client is obviously emotionally invested in Miss Martinez's safety. That's admirable, not criminal. However, if you're concerned about witness security, perhaps we can discuss a formal arrangement. Romano's facility is equipped with state-of-the-art security systems. With proper oversight from your department, it could serve as an effective protective location until Ms. Martinez recovers enough to provide a statement." Kim considered this for a long moment. That would be highly irregular. So is a hit squad targeting a nurse in a hospital parking lot? Vincent shot back. "Regular procedures don't seem to be cutting it. Detective, how many officers can you spare for round-the-clock protection? And for how long? Days, weeks? My facility has a full security team, all former military or law enforcement, working 3 rotating shifts. No gaps in coverage, no budget constraints, no jurisdictional issues. Tell me honestly, can the NYPD provide better protection?" The detectives couldn't answer because they all knew the truth. Police departments ran on stretched budgets and overworked officers. Providing the level of security Sophia would need for an extended period simply wasn't realistic, especially if this case dragged on as investigations involving powerful politicians typically did. "We need access," Kim said finally. "Regular check-ins with Ms. Martinez once she's conscious, updates on her medical condition, and if she chooses to leave your facility, that happens without interference." "Agreed to all of it," Vincent said immediately. "Detective, I want the people who did this caught and prosecuted, but more than that, I want Sophia safe. If working with your department helps accomplish both those goals, I'm all in." Morrison still looked skeptical, but Kim seemed to be calculating the practical benefits. "We'll need to run this by our lieutenant, but provisionally we can work with this arrangement. In the meantime, Mister, if you think of anything else that might help our investigation, I'll call immediately," Vincent promised. As the detectives gathered their materials and prepared to leave, Kim paused at the door. "Romano, a word of advice. Whatever you're planning to do outside official channels, don't. We know your reputation. We know you have resources and connections we can't match. But if you go down that road, you'll compromise our investigation and potentially any future prosecution. Let us do our jobs." Vincent met her gaze steadily. "Detective, I have no idea what you're implying. I'm just a concerned citizen trying to help a friend in need." Kim's expression said she didn't believe that for a second, but she simply nodded and left with her partner. Once they were gone, Margaret turned to Vincent with a mixture of exasperation and professional concern. "Vincent, please tell me you're not planning to do something stupid." Define stupid. Anything that involves violence, intimidation, or actions that could be construed as obstruction of justice. Vincent stood, adjusting his jacket. "Margaret, you've been my lawyer for 12 years. Have I ever done anything you'd consider stupid?" "Yes, frequently. Which is why you keep me on retainer." Despite everything, Vincent felt a faint smile touch his lips. "Fair point. But in this case, I promise I'll be careful. Sophia's safety is the priority. Everything else is secondary." "See that it stays that way," Margaret said, though her tone suggested she knew she was fighting a losing battle. And Vincent, the fact that she listed you as an emergency contact, that matters whether you want to admit it or not. After Margaret left, Vincent stood alone in the waiting room as dawn fully broke outside the windows, painting the city in shades of gold and amber. His phone buzzed continuously with updates. Angelo confirming Sophia's arrival at the facility. Rico sending preliminary reports on the shooters' identities. Various underbosses checking in about the disruption to normal business operations. But Vincent ignored all of it for a moment, focusing instead on the strange feeling in his chest. He'd built his life on control, controlling situations, people, outcomes. He'd learned early that emotion was weakness, that attachment made you vulnerable, that caring about anything too much gave your enemies leverage. Sofia Martinez had somehow slipped past every defense he'd constructed, becoming important to him without his permission or conscious awareness. And now she was fighting for her life because the violence he'd spent years containing had spilled over onto her anyway. The rational part of his brain knew this wasn't his fault. Sofia had been caught up in something involving a corrupt senator and a whistleblowing attorney. Nothing to do with Vincent's world at all. But just in case, I wanted you to know you're safe. You're going to recover. And whoever did this to you, Sofia, they're going to pay for it. I promise you that. He sat there for what might have been minutes or hours, time losing its usual meaning in the quiet of the room. His phone buzzed periodically with updates from his organization, but he ignored it. For once, the business of running a criminal empire could wait. A soft knock at the door announced Angelo's arrival. Boss, sorry to interrupt, but Rico's got something. He's downstairs in the conference room. Says it's urgent. Reluctantly, Vincent released Sofia's hand and stood. He leaned down, surprising himself by pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. I'll be back, he whispered. I promise. The facility's conference room was on the ground floor, a windowless space designed for privacy and security. Rico was already there, his laptop open on the table, surrounded by printed photographs and documents. He looked like he hadn't slept, his usual neat appearance disheveled, his eyes red from staring at screens. Please tell me you have good news, Vincent said, closing the door behind him. Good and bad, Rico replied. Good news first. I identified the shooters, Mikhail Orlov and Pavel Volkov, both former Spetsnaz, both working as enforcers for the Petrov Bratva. They're not subtle operators. Their specialty is intimidation and wet work, not surgical hits. Which explains why everything went sideways when Torino showed up. They were sent to kill a nurse, not handle a complication. Vincent studied the photographs Rico had pulled up. Two hard-faced men in their 30s, the kind of people who looked dangerous, even in casual settings. Where are they now? That's the bad news. Orlov's dead, killed in what looks like a professional cleanup about 3 hours after the hospital shooting. Single bullet to the back of the head, execution style. Body was found in a warehouse in Red Hook. Volkov's gone to ground. We're working on finding him, but he's smart enough to know he's next on the chopping block. Vincent absorbed this information, his mind racing through implications. Someone's cleaning house, eliminating loose ends. Exactly. And there's more. Rico pulled up another file on his laptop. I dug into Senator Bradford's connections like you asked. Turns out he's been taking money from Alexei Petrov's operation for years. Campaign contributions laundered through legitimate businesses, personal favors, protection from investigations. In exchange, Bradford makes sure certain police operations get redirected, certain prosecutions don't happen, certain regulatory issues disappear. So when Torino, the attorney, decided to testify about Bradford's financial irregularities, he was threatening to expose not just the senator, but Alexei's entire New York operation. Rico finished. You'd eventually tell us everything anyway, but the process would be considerably less pleasant. So, which option sounds better to you? Volkov was silent for a long moment, weighing his choices. Vincent could see the calculation happening behind the Russian's eyes. Loyalty to Alexei versus self-preservation. The oath of silence versus the very real possibility of dying in this warehouse. Finally, survival won out. Okay, Volkov said quietly. I tell you, but you promise protection. Alexei finds out I talk. I'm dead, man. You have my word. Now start talking. The story that emerged over the next 2 hours was worse than Vincent had feared. Sophia hadn't been random collateral damage or even a potential witness to some ancillary crime. She'd been specifically targeted after Sarah Bradford, the senator's daughter, had mentioned to Alexei Petrov during a private meeting that a nurse at St. Mary's seemed unusually interested in my father's visits. Sophia, in her characteristic compassion, had apparently noticed how stressed Sarah seemed and had asked if everything was okay at home, a completely innocent gesture from someone who cared about her patient's well-being. But to Alexei and the senator, that innocent question had looked like suspicion, like potential exposure. They'd decided elimination was safer than risk, ordering Volkov and Orlov to make it look like a mugging gone wrong. Torino's arrival had complicated things. He'd apparently been meeting Sophia to discuss her testifying about what she'd seen in patient records, though the attorney had been killed before the meeting could happen. Alexei was angry when we failed. Volkov concluded, said we were sloppy, that we'd brought heat down on operation. Mikhail, he was panicking, talking about running. That's when Alexei had him killed. I knew I was next, so I ran first. Vincent sat back, processing the information. Sophia had been condemned to death for showing compassion, for doing her job well, for being the kind of person who noticed when others were in distress. The injustice of it made his blood boil. One more question, Vincent said. Where does Alexei operate from? I'm not talking about his public businesses. Where does he actually run his empire? Volkov hesitated, and Vincent saw the moment the Russian realized he'd already gone too far to stop. Now, Brighton Beach, private club called Zalato, Gold in English, has office in back, very secure. Romano, you cannot just walk in there. Alexei has many guards, many connections, even you. Let me worry about that. Vincent cut him off. He stood and nodded to Angelo. Get him secured somewhere safe. Medical attention, food, whatever he needs. But nobody knows where he is except us. If Alexei's people come asking, Volkov's dead. Body dumped in the harbor. Understood. Yes, boss. As Angelo led the prisoner away, Vincent pulled out his phone and sent a text to Rico. Need a meeting with the other families. Tomorrow, neutral ground. Topic: Russian overreach and appropriate response. It was more than Vincent had hoped for, and exactly what he'd needed. The meeting with Alexei Petrov happened 2 days later in yet another neutral location. This time, a warehouse in Queens that had seen its share of negotiations over the years. Alexei arrived with his own entourage, a bear of a man in his 50s with cold eyes and a reputation for ruthlessness that matched Vincent's own. Alexei greeted him in heavily accented English. I hear you've been making waves, killing my men, disrupting my operations. This is not friendly behavior between business associates. We're not associates, Vincent replied coldly. Associates don't target civilians. Your men tried to kill a nurse, Alexei, an innocent woman whose only crime was being good at her job. That violates every code we operate under. Alexei waved a dismissive hand. Collateral damage, sometimes unavoidable in our line of work. Not when the collateral is someone under Romano protection, and not when it brings unnecessary heat down on all of us. Vincent leaned forward. Here's how this is going to work. You're going to make a formal apology to the 5 families for overstepping. You're going to pay compensation, $2 million to be split among various civilian protection funds we'll establish. And you're going to guarantee on pain of your entire operation being dismantled that Sofia Martinez and anyone else she cares about are completely off limits forever. And if I refuse, Alexei asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer, then the 5 families move against you together. Your operations get shut down, your people get arrested or worse, and your connections back to Moscow won't be able to help you fast enough. You're a smart man, Alexei. Do the math. The silence stretched for a long moment before Alexei finally nodded, his expression sour. 2 million formal apology. The woman is untouchable. You should know this kind of weakness. Caring about civilians, it will get you killed someday. Men like us, we don't get happy endings. Maybe not, Vincent agreed. But at least I'll die knowing I tried to protect something good instead of just destroying it. As he left the warehouse, Vincent felt the weight of the past week finally catching up to him. It was done. Sophia was safe. Truly safe now. Protected by agreements that transcended any single family or organization. Alexei would honor the deal because the alternative was his own destruction, and the other families would enforce it because they'd all agreed to it. Now came the hard part. keeping his promise to send Sophia away. Sophia was sitting up when Vincent returned to her room at the facility, color finally returning to her cheeks. 2 weeks had passed since the shooting, and Dr. Tanaka had declared her recovery remarkable, though still requiring another week of monitored care before she'd be medically cleared to leave. Physical therapy had begun, helping Sophia regain strength after the extended bed rest. Sophia was propped up slightly in bed, the ventilator removed and replaced with a simple oxygen cannula. Her face was still pale, dark circles under her eyes, testament to the trauma her body had endured. But her eyes were open, those warm brown eyes that had haunted Vincent's thoughts for 6 months. And they tracked to him the moment he entered the room. "Vincent," she said, her voice rough from the breathing tube. "They told me that I'm not at St. Mary's anymore." He approached slowly, as if sudden movement might shatter this fragile moment. "You're at a private medical facility. You were shot, Sophia, 3 days ago in the hospital parking lot. Do you remember?" Her eyes closed briefly, and when they opened again, there was pain in them that had nothing to do with physical injuries. "I remember 2 men. They were waiting by my car. They asked me about Sarah Bradford, about what I'd seen in her patient files. I told them I didn't know what they were talking about, that I couldn't discuss patients." She paused, breathing carefully around the pain. "Then there was another man. He tried to help me. And then gunshots. I remember falling. Pain, and then nothing until I woke up here." Vincent pulled the chair close to her bedside, taking her hand gently in his. "The other man was Michael Torino, an attorney. He was killed, but you survived, Sophia. You're going to be okay. How did I end up here? Where is he exactly?" This was the conversation Vincent had been dreading. How did he explain without lying, but also without revealing too much? "This is a private medical facility that I own. After the shooting, I had you transferred here where you could receive better security and care. The doctors at St. Mary's agreed it was the safest option." Sophia studied his face, and Vincent could see her working through the implications. "Security because the men who shot me might try again. They won't get the chance," Vincent said firmly. "The shooters are no longer a threat. One is dead. The other is in protective custody, and the people who ordered the attack." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Let's just say I've made it very clear what happens to anyone who tries to hurt you." Something shifted in Sophia's expression. Not fear exactly, but a kind of wary understanding. "Who are you, Vincent? Really? Because I don't think you're just a grateful uncle who makes generous donations to hospitals." He'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it, but it was still harder than he'd expected to find the right words. "You're right. I'm not. Sophia, my full name is Vincent Romano. Does that name mean anything to you?" He saw recognition dawn in her eyes, followed by a complex mix of emotions he couldn't quite read. Romano, like the crime family, like the mob. It wasn't a question. "Yes, I'm the head of the Romano family. Have been for the past 8 years since my father died." "You know what I think?" Sophia said, interrupting his thoughts. "I think we're going to be okay. Not perfect. We'll have bad days and disagreements, and probably some seriously scary moments. But okay. Maybe even happy." Vincent pulled her closer, marveling at how this small woman had somehow become the center of his universe without him even noticing it happening. "You were fighting for life and kept saying my name." He reminded her you could have called for anyone. Your mother, your friends, anyone. "But you called for me. Because somewhere deep down, I knew you'd come. That you'd move heaven and earth to keep me safe. And you did. I always will," Vincent promised. "That's not romance or hyperbole, Sophia. That's a promise from someone who understands the weight of promises. You're under Romano protection now, which means the full resources of my organization stand between you and anything that might hurt you. Even you." Sophia asked gently. "Especially me." They sat there in comfortable silence as the city lights glimmered outside the windows. 2 people from impossible worlds who'd somehow found each other in the darkness. A mob boss learning that power wasn't everything. A nurse teaching him that caring wasn't weakness. 2 scarred souls deciding that together they might actually be whole. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be complications. Rival organizations testing boundaries. Law enforcement asking uncomfortable questions. The constant balancing act between Vincent's world and Sophia's work. But for the first time in his life, Vincent found himself looking forward to the future rather than simply surviving it. Because Sophia had been right. She'd fought for life and called his name. And in saving her, He'd somehow saved himself. 3 weeks later, Sophia was finally cleared for discharge. Dr. Tanaka had been impressed with her recovery, though he'd warned about the psychological trauma that often followed violent attacks. Vincent had arranged for the best trauma counselors, but Sophia had surprised everyone by adapting with remarkable resilience. Perhaps it was her medical background, or maybe the strength that had drawn Vincent to her in the first place. She understood that healing took time, but she wasn't willing to let fear control her life. The morning of her release, Vincent found himself more nervous than he'd been facing down rival crime families. He'd prepared everything. A secure apartment in a building he owned, round-the-clock protection disguised as building security, a modified schedule at the hospital that would keep her away from public areas. But he hadn't prepared for the conversation they needed to have about what came next. Sophia was sitting in the facility's garden when he found her. It was a small space, carefully designed for patient recovery, with walking paths and benches positioned to catch the morning sun. She wore civilian clothes for the first time since the shooting, a simple blue dress that made her look impossibly normal after weeks of hospital gowns. The sight of her looking healthy and whole made something tight in Vincent's chest finally loosen. "You're early," she said, looking up with a smile that still had the power to derail his thoughts. "I thought visiting hours didn't start until 10. "I own the building," Vincent replied, settling onto the bench beside her. "Different rules apply. How are you feeling?" "Like I'm about to rejoin the world after living in a bubble for 3 weeks. She gestured toward the facility's windows where staff could be seen moving through corridors. "It's beautiful here, Vincent. You built something really special. But it's not real life, is it? This protected space where nothing can hurt me." Vincent studied her profile, trying to read the emotions flickering across her face. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I can't live in a bubble forever. I know you've made arrangements. The apartment, the security detail, the modified work schedule. Angelo told me about it yesterday when he thought I was asleep." She turned to face him fully. "I appreciate everything you've done. More than appreciate it. You saved my life in every way that matters. But I need to know what you're expecting from me. From us." The question he'd been avoiding hung between them like a loaded weapon. What did he expect? What did he want? For weeks, he'd focused entirely on keeping her safe, on eliminating threats and building walls around her. But he hadn't allowed himself to think about what happened after the walls were built. "I don't know," he admitted, the honesty surprising them both. "I've spent my entire adult life controlling situations, manipulating outcomes, planning 3 moves ahead. But with you, Sophia, I find myself in completely uncharted territory." She reached over and took his hand, the simple gesture sending warmth up his arm. "That's probably the most honest thing anyone has ever said to me. And it's terrifying and wonderful at the same time. Because I don't know either, Vincent. I know that I listed you as my emergency contact for reasons I couldn't even explain to myself at the time. I know that when I was fighting to stay conscious in that parking lot, your name was the only thing that felt like an anchor. But I also know that your world and mine don't exactly overlap." "They don't," Vincent agreed. "And I won't lie to you about what that means. There will always be risks, Sophia. People who might try to use you to get to me. Situations where your safety depends on security measures that most people never have to think about. There will be questions you can't ask and activities you can't know about. If you choose this, choose us, you're choosing a life that's fundamentally different from the one you planned. And if I choose differently," she asked quietly, "what then?" "Then I make sure you're safe regardless. New identity if necessary, relocation, whatever it takes. You disappear completely from my world and live the life you want without any interference from me or anyone connected to me." Vincent's voice was steady despite the pain the words caused. "Your safety matters more than anything else, Sophia. More than what I want. More than what we might have together." Sophia was quiet for a long moment, watching a sparrow hop along the garden path. The silence stretched, and Vincent found himself holding his breath, waiting for her decision. Finally, she spoke. "Tell me about your nephew. The one I treated 6 months ago. What's his name?" The change of subject caught Vincent off guard. "Alessandro." "Why?" "Because you never talk about your family, but you moved heaven and earth for that little boy. And when you donated equipment to the hospital, you specifically asked that it go to the pediatric wing. You could have chosen any department, gotten more recognition with something flashier, but you chose the children's ward." She squeezed his hand. I want to understand who you really are, Vincent. Not the crime boss, not the dangerous man everyone fears, but the person who cares enough about a sick child to change his life for a nurse he barely knows. Vincent felt something shift in his chest, a wall cracking that he'd spent decades building. Alessandro is my sister's son. Maria died when he was 3, cancer, and her husband couldn't handle being a single parent. So Alessandro came to live with me. He was 8 when he got sick, pneumonia that turned into something worse. The doctors at the public hospital said they'd done everything they could, that he needed specialized care we couldn't access fast enough through normal channels. That's when you brought him to St. Mary's. That's when I learned that money can buy a lot of things, but it can't buy what you gave him. You didn't just treat his symptoms, Sophia. You treated him like he mattered, like his fear and confusion were as important as his medical condition. You stayed late on your own time to read to him when the nightmares got bad. You advocated for him with other departments when insurance tried to deny coverage for treatments you thought he needed. Vincent's voice softened with the memory. He's 11 now, completely healthy, and he still talks about the angel nurse who made him feel brave. Sophia's eyes filled with tears. She quickly blinked away. You never told me any of that, because I didn't want you to feel obligated. What you did for Alessandro, you did because of who you are, not because of who I am. I didn't want to complicate that with expectations or gratitude. Vincent paused, then decided to risk complete honesty. But watching you with him, seeing the kind of person you are, that's when I knew I was in serious trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind where a man who's spent his life avoiding emotional attachments finds himself completely undone by a nurse who refuses to be bought, impressed, or intimidated. The kind where he starts questioning every choice he's made and wondering if there might be a different way to live. Vincent met her eyes directly. The kind where he falls in love despite every logical reason why he shouldn't. The words hung in the air between them, irreversible now that they'd been spoken. Sophia's expression was unreadable, and Vincent found himself preparing for rejection, for the sensible choice that would send her safely away from his dangerous world. Instead, she surprised him. Alessandro, she said thoughtfully. I remember him. Brave little boy with your eyes and a smile that could light up the entire ward. He drew me a picture of a superhero before he was discharged. Said it was his uncle Vincent, the man who saves people. She smiled at the memory. I kept that picture, you know. It's on my refrigerator at home. Vincent felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. You kept it. A child's vision of who you really are seemed important somehow. Sophia stood up from the bench, and Vincent's heart dropped, thinking she was preparing to leave. Instead, she extended her hand to him. Walk with me. I want to see the rest of this garden before I have to say goodbye to it. They walked in comfortable silence for several minutes, following paths that wound between carefully maintained flower beds and small trees. The facility's garden was larger than it appeared from the windows, designed to give patients space to heal both physically and mentally. Vincent had approved every detail of its construction, but he'd never actually walked through it until now. This is beautiful, Sophia said as they paused beside a small fountain. You could have built a sterile medical facility and called it adequate. Instead, you created something that actually helps people heal. That tells me something about who you are too, Vincent. I had help, he said quietly. The head of our medical division, Dr. Reyes, she insisted that healing environments needed to address the whole person, not just their injuries. I thought she was being overly optimistic, but the results speak for themselves. Sophia nodded approvingly. Smart woman, and smart boss for listening to her. She turned to face him directly. Vincent, I need you to understand something. I'm not naive about what your life involves. I know there are aspects of your business that exist in gray areas, and probably some that are much darker than gray. I'm not asking you to pretend otherwise, and I'm not asking you to change who you are for me. Then what are you asking? I'm asking if there's room in your life for something that isn't about power or control or strategic advantage. Something that's just about two people who found each other in impossible circumstances and want to see what they might build together. She paused, choosing her words carefully. I'm asking if you're willing to trust that what we have is strong enough to survive in your world without me becoming a liability or a weakness. Vincent stopped walking, the weight of her words hitting him with unexpected force. You're not a weakness, Sophia. You're the opposite of everything weak I've ever known. Then prove it, she said simply. Don't hide me away in a protected apartment like some precious object that might break. Don't change my work schedule or limit my life to keep me safe. Trust me to be strong enough to handle the reality of loving you. And if something happens to you because of me, Vincent asked, the fear he'd been carrying for weeks finally finding voice. Then, that's a risk I'm choosing to take with full knowledge of what it means. Sophia moved closer, close enough that he could see the determination in her eyes. Vincent, I've spent my entire career making life and death decisions. I've held dying children in my arms and fought for patients everyone else had given up on. I'm not fragile, and I'm not helpless. I'm asking you to see me as a partner, not a victim who needs constant protection. The conversation was interrupted by the soft chime of Vincent's phone. He glanced at the screen and saw Angelo's name, the coded message that meant urgent business requiring his immediate attention. For a moment, he considered ignoring it, but Sophia noticed his hesitation. Go, she said quietly. Handle whatever needs handling. But Vincent, when you're done, come back. We're not finished with this conversation. He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture that felt both natural and revolutionary. I'll be back, he promised. And Sophia, thank you. For what? For seeing something in me worth saving. The urgent business turned out to be a territorial dispute brewing in Queens, the kind of mundane but potentially explosive situation that required Vincent's personal attention to prevent it from escalating into something that would draw unwanted police scrutiny. By the time he'd mediated between two hot-headed lieutenants and established clear boundaries that both sides could accept, the sun was setting, and he'd been away from Sophia for nearly 8 hours. He found her in the facility's small library, a cozy space designed for patients who were well enough to read, but not yet ready for discharge. She was curled up in one of the comfortable chairs, reading a medical journal, her hair falling across her face in a way that made her look impossibly young and vulnerable. The sight of her safe and peaceful sent relief flooding through him. Long day, she observed, looking up as he entered. Longer than I'd planned. Vincent settled into the chair beside hers. Two grown men acting like children because someone parked a delivery truck on the wrong corner. Sometimes I think middle school teachers have an easier job than I do. Sophia laughed, the sound warming the quiet library. Probably. At least when 12-year-olds fight, they don't usually carry weapons. She marked her place in the journal and set it aside. I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. Vincent's pulse quickened, uncertain whether she'd spent the day reconsidering her willingness to enter his world. And I think I understand now why you built this place. She gestured around the library, taking in its carefully chosen books and comfortable furniture. It's not just about medical care, is it? It's about creating spaces where people can heal from things that go deeper than physical injuries. Vincent nodded slowly. The people in my world, they accumulate damage over time. Not just from violence, though there's plenty of that, but from the constant stress of living with danger, of making choices that normal people never have to make. Traditional hospitals treat the symptoms, but they don't address the underlying trauma. So you created a place where they could address both. Among other things, Vincent looked around the library, remembering the discussions with architects and medical staff about how to design spaces that promoted genuine healing. We also treat civilians who get caught up in situations beyond their control. Witnesses who need protection, family members who become targets, people like you who end up in our world through no choice of their own. People like me, Sophia repeated thoughtfully. How often does that happen? More often than I'd like. Vincent's expression darkened slightly. The nature of what we do means that innocent people sometimes get hurt, either by us or by our enemies. When that happens, we have a responsibility to make it right. And this facility is how you make it right. This facility is how we try to make it right. Sometimes the damage is too extensive, sometimes the trauma runs too deep. But we try. Vincent met her eyes directly. The difference with you, Sophia, is that you're not someone who got hurt by accident and needs to be compensated. You're someone I care about. Someone whose well-being matters to me for reasons that have nothing to do with obligation or responsibility. Sophia was quiet for a moment, processing his words. Then she surprised him by asking, "Can I see the rest of it? The facility, I mean. I've been here for 3 weeks, but I've only seen my room, the garden, and this library." Vincent hesitated. Much of the facility was designed for privacy, with sections that housed people whose safety depended on anonymity. But Sophia's request wasn't idle curiosity. She was trying to understand his world, to see the full scope of what she might be choosing. There are parts one can't show you, he said finally. People who are here because their lives depend on no one knowing where they are. But there are other areas. The rehabilitation wing, the trauma counseling center, the children's ward. There's a children's ward for situations involving families. Sometimes when we're protecting someone, we're protecting their children too. Sometimes the children themselves are the targets. Vincent's voice was careful, knowing he was treading into territory that might change how Sophia saw him. We try to make it as normal as possible for them, but kids know when their world isn't safe anymore. Sophia stood up abruptly, and Vincent prepared himself for her to say she'd heard enough, that the reality of his world was too dark for her to accept. Instead, she extended her hand to him. "Show me," she said quietly. They spent the next 2 hours walking through parts of the facility that Vincent had never shown to anyone outside his organization. Sophia asked thoughtful questions about the design choices, the staffing decisions, the protocols for maintaining both medical standards and security requirements. She observed the careful balance between creating a healing environment and maintaining the vigilance necessary to protect vulnerable people. In the children's ward, they encountered Alessandro, who was visiting one of the young patients. Vincent had arranged for his nephew to volunteer at the facility on weekends, partly to keep him connected to the medical staff who'd saved his life, but mostly because Alessandro had a gift for making scared children feel less alone. "Uncle Vincent," Alessandro called out, clearly delighted to see him. "Maria, look who's here. This is my uncle, the one I told you about." Maria was perhaps 6 years old, with large dark eyes and a shy smile. She was recovering from injuries sustained when her father's gambling debts had put their family in danger. The specifics were classified, but Vincent knew that Angelo's people had extracted the family from a situation that would have ended badly for all of them. "Hello, Maria," Vincent said gently, crouching down to her level. "Alessandro's been telling me what a brave girl you are." Sophia watched this interaction with fascination. She saw the way Vincent's entire demeanor softened around the children, the way Alessandro clearly adored his uncle despite understanding very little about what Vincent actually did for a living. She saw the way the little girl responded to Vincent's gentle tone, the careful way he asked about her drawings and her favorite books without mentioning anything about why she was at the facility. Later, as they walked back toward Sophia's room, she was unusually quiet. Vincent found himself nervous about her silence, uncertain whether what she'd seen had reassured her or convinced her that his world was too complicated for her to navigate. Finally, she spoke. "Alessandro adores you. He's a good kid. Smart, resilient, doesn't ask questions about things he's too young to understand. And Maria, how long will she be here?" "As long as necessary. Her father's debts have been resolved, but there are people who might still see value in using her to send a message. We'll keep the family safe until the situation stabilizes completely." Vincent glanced at Sophia, trying to read her expression. "Sometimes that takes months. Where do they go afterward?" "People like Maria's family. New identities, new locations, new lives. We have resources for that kind of thing." Vincent paused outside Sophia's room. "Sophia, I know this is a lot to process. Seeing how we operate, understanding the scope of what protecting people actually involves." She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful but not distressed. "It is a lot," she admitted. "But it's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, something darker, more ruthless." Sophia leaned against her doorframe, studying his face. "Don't misunderstand me. I know there are aspects of your business that involve violence, that cross legal and moral lines I probably don't want to think about too clearly. But what I saw today, Vincent, it's not just about power or money. You've built something that actually helps people." "It helps some people," Vincent corrected, "and it's funded by activities that hurt others. I won't pretend there's moral clarity in what I do, Sophia. The money that pays for Maria's protection and Alessandro's medical care comes from sources that aren't exactly legitimate." Sophia nodded slowly. "I understand that. But Vincent, in my world, we deal with moral complexity too. We treat patients whose injuries came from domestic violence, but we also treat their abusers when they come in bleeding from fights. We save the lives of drunk drivers and the people they hit with equal dedication. We don't get to choose who deserves our help based on how they ended up needing it. That's different, is it?" Sophia's voice was gentle but challenging. "You told me that people in your world accumulate damage over time. that they make choices normal people never have to make. Maybe the line between victim and perpetrator isn't as clear as most people want to believe. Vincent stared at her, struck by the unexpected perspective. He'd spent years justifying his choices to himself, finding ways to rationalize the violence and moral compromises that came with his position. But he'd never heard someone outside his world acknowledge the complexity without either condemning it entirely or romanticizing it beyond recognition. "How do you do that?" he asked quietly. "Do what?" "See the world in shades of gray without losing your moral compass. Accept complexity without becoming cynical about it." Sophia considered the question seriously. "I think it comes from working in places where life and death decisions happen every day. You learn that most situations don't have perfect solutions, only better and worse choices. You learn to save who you can and forgive yourself for the ones you can't." She paused, then continued. "And maybe you learn that loving someone doesn't mean believing they're perfect. It means accepting who they really are and choosing to see the best in them anyway." The words hit Vincent with unexpected force. In his world, love was often a liability, a weakness that enemies could exploit. But Sophia was describing something different. Love as a choice rather than a vulnerability. Love as a strength rather than a threat to be managed. "Sophia," he said quietly, "I need you to understand something. If you choose this, choose us, there will be times when I have to make decisions you won't like. Times when I'll have to do things that conflict with everything you believe about right and wrong. I won't lie to you about them, but I also can't promise that your opinion will change the choices I have to make." "I understand," Sophia said simply. "And Vincent, I need you to understand something too. If I choose this, I'm not choosing to be a passive observer in your life. I'm not going to stand quietly by while you make all the important decisions about our relationship and my safety. I have skills, I have strengths, and I have perspectives that might actually be useful in your world." Vincent felt a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth despite the seriousness of their conversation. "Are you negotiating the terms of our relationship?" "I'm establishing boundaries," Sophia corrected with mock seriousness. "Very different thing." He laughed then, surprised by the lightness he felt despite everything they discussed. "You realize you're probably the first person to successfully negotiate anything with me in about 10 years. Really? What's my secret?" "You're not afraid of me." Sophia's expression grew more thoughtful. "Most people in your world are afraid of disappointing you, afraid of the consequences of being wrong. But I've seen you with Alessandro. I've seen you with Maria. I've seen the choices you made to protect me. I know who you really are underneath all the careful control. And who am I? You're someone who cares deeply about protecting the people you love. Someone who builds hospitals for damaged souls and reads bedtime stories to scared children. Someone who spent 3 weeks sleeping in hospital chairs because you couldn't bear to leave me alone." Sophia moved closer, close enough to touch his face gently. "You're someone worth choosing, Vincent, even with all the complications." Vincent felt something fundamental shift in his chest. A tension he'd carried for so long he'd forgotten it was there finally releasing. For the first time since Sophia had been shot, he allowed himself to believe that they might actually have a future together. 2 days later, Sophia moved into her new apartment. It was in one of Vincent's buildings, but on a floor with other tenants who had no connection to his organization. The security was invisible but comprehensive, the kind of protection that allowed her to live normally while ensuring her safety. Vincent had given her space to adjust to her new reality, visiting in the evenings but not hovering, letting her rebuild her independence at her own pace. She returned to work at St. Mary's on a modified schedule, working day shifts only and avoiding the parking area where she'd been attacked. Her colleagues welcomed her back with relief and careful questions about her recovery. She deflected most inquiries about the shooting, maintaining the official story that it had been a random attack and that she was doing well. Only Dr. Richardson knew about her connection to Vincent, and he'd proven surprisingly discreet about keeping that information private. It was during her 3rd week back at work that Sophia first encountered the reality of what loving Vincent Romano actually meant in practical terms. She was leaving the hospital after a particularly difficult shift, exhausted by a series of emergency cases, when she noticed a man following her. He wasn't obvious about it, staying far enough back to seem casual, but Sophia had developed hyper-awareness about her surroundings since the shooting. Instead of panicking, she remembered the protocols Angelo had taught her. She ducked into a coffee shop, ordered a drink, and used the opportunity to call the number Vincent had programmed into her phone for emergencies. Within minutes, two of Vincent's security team appeared, flanking the man who'd been following her and escorting him away with efficient discretion. Vincent arrived at her apartment 20 minutes later, clearly shaken by how quickly the situation had escalated. "Are you all right?" he asked, checking her over for any signs of distress. "I'm fine," Sophia assured him. "A little rattled, but fine." "Who was he?" "Reporter," Vincent said grimly. "Investigative journalist working on a story about connections between organized crime families and legitimate businesses. He'd somehow identified you as someone worth following." "How did he find me?" "We're still working on that." Vincent's expression was dark with barely contained anger. "But Sophia, this is what I was afraid of. This is why I wanted to keep you completely separate from my world." Sophia studied his face, seeing the fear and guilt he was trying to hide. "Vincent, a reporter followed me for 3 blocks and took some pictures. Your people handled the situation before anything dangerous happened. I'm safe, I'm unharmed, and now I know what it feels like to deal with this kind of attention." She moved closer, taking his hands in hers. "This is not a crisis. This is just Tuesday in your world. But it shouldn't be Tuesday in yours." "Why not?" Sophia's voice was calm and reasonable. "Vincent, I knew when I chose this that there would be complications. I knew that loving you meant accepting risks that other people don't have to think about. One reporter with a camera is not going to change my mind about us." Vincent pulled her against him, holding her tightly. "You were supposed to call for backup the moment you noticed him following you." "I did call for backup," Sophia pointed out. "Angelo's people were there within minutes. The system worked exactly like it was supposed to." He pulled back to look at her, seeing the matter-of-fact way she was handling what could have been a dangerous situation. "You're not even scared." "I'm concerned," Sophia corrected. "But Vincent, I deal with life-threatening emergencies every day at work. A journalist with a telephoto lens doesn't exactly register as a crisis-level event." Vincent shook his head, marveling at her composure. "Most people would be demanding increased security or threatening to leave the city entirely. Most people aren't in love with someone whose job involves managing actual danger on a regular basis." Sophia's tone was gentle but firm. "I'm not most people, Vincent. I knew what I was choosing when I chose you." The incident with the reporter became a turning point in their relationship. Rather than driving them apart, it demonstrated to Vincent that Sophia could handle the realities of his world without losing herself in fear or paranoia. She was pragmatic about security without becoming obsessive, careful about her surroundings without becoming isolated. More importantly, it showed her that Vincent's protection wasn't about controlling her life. It was about creating space for her to live normally despite abnormal circumstances. When the reporter published his story 2 weeks later, it focused on Vincent's legitimate business interests and mentioned Sophia only as an unnamed hospital employee. Vincent's people had clearly made it worth the man's while to keep certain details private. 6 months after the shooting, Sophia and Vincent had settled into a routine that balanced their very different worlds. She worked at the hospital, he managed his organization, and in the evenings they carved out time for themselves that belonged entirely to them. They cooked dinner together, watched movies, argued about books, and slowly built the kind of intimate domestic happiness that neither had expected to find. Alessandro spent weekends with them, delighted to have Sophia as a permanent fixture in their family. He'd begun calling her Aunt Sophia without anyone suggesting it, and she'd embraced the role with natural warmth. Vincent watched them together and saw glimpses of the life he'd never imagined wanting. It wasn't perfect. There were nights when Vincent came home late and tense from dealing with situations he couldn't discuss. There were times when Sophia's work required her to stay at the hospital for extended shifts, leaving him to worry about her safety. There were moments when the fundamental differences in their backgrounds created friction they had to work through carefully. But it was real. It was built on honesty about who they were and what they could offer each other. It was sustained by mutual respect and the recognition that loving someone meant accepting them completely, complications included. On a quiet Sunday morning 8 months after Sophia had been shot, Vincent woke to find her sitting by the window of their bedroom, reading and drinking coffee while Alessandro slept in the guest room down the hall. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, painting everything in soft gold, and for a moment Vincent allowed himself to simply appreciate the peaceful domesticity of the scene. "What are you reading?" he asked, moving to sit beside her. Medical journal, Sophia replied, showing him an article about trauma treatment in conflict zones. There's a program in Syria where doctors are using techniques similar to what you've developed at the facility, treating physical injuries alongside psychological trauma in integrated care settings. Vincent glanced at the article, intrigued despite himself. Different context, but similar principles. Exactly. Sophia set the journal aside and turned to face him. Vincent, I've been thinking about something. What kind of something? The kind where I might have an idea that could benefit both your world and mine. Sophia's expression was thoughtful, excited in the way that usually meant she'd been planning something complex. What if there was a way to expand the model you've created? Not just for people connected to your organization, but for civilians who've been affected by violence they had nothing to do with. Vincent felt his pulse quicken, uncertain where she was heading. What are you proposing? A partnership between your facility and St. Mary's. A trauma center that combines medical treatment with long-term psychological support for victims of violent crime. Sophia's voice grew more animated as she explained her vision. We see so many people who survive the initial assault, the shooting, the attack, but then struggle for months or years with the aftermath. They need more than traditional therapy, Vincent. They need comprehensive care that addresses every aspect of recovery. And you think my facility could provide that? I think your facility already provides that, just for a different population. Sophia leaned forward, clearly excited about the possibilities. What if we expanded it? Created a civilian wing that served anyone who needed that level of care, regardless of their connection to organized crime. Funded it through legitimate channels, staffed it with people from both our worlds. Vincent stared at her, struck by the scope of what she was suggesting. You're talking about a major expansion. Significant investment, regulatory oversight, public scrutiny. I'm talking about taking something you built to help people and making it available to help more people. Sophia's voice was warm with conviction. Vincent, you've created something revolutionary. A model for treating trauma that actually works. Why limit it to people in your world when it could benefit anyone who's been hurt by violence? Because my world is complicated, Vincent said slowly. Because expansion means exposure, and exposure means risk. Sophia nodded, acknowledging his concerns. I know it's complicated. I know there would be risks and challenges we haven't even thought of yet. But Vincent, think about what we could accomplish. Think about the lives we could change. Vincent was quiet for a long moment, processing the possibilities and the dangers. It was an audacious idea, the kind of project that could either transform how trauma care was delivered or expose vulnerabilities in his organization that enemies could exploit. But it was also exactly the kind of vision that drew him to Sophia in the first place. Her ability to see beyond the constraints of how things were to imagine how they could be. We need to be very careful about how we structure it, he said finally. Sophia's face lit up with surprised delight. Are you seriously considering this? I'm seriously considering the possibility that you might be brilliant, Vincent replied. But Sophia, if we do this, there's no going back. This kind of partnership would permanently link your professional reputation to my organization. There would be questions, investigations, scrutiny that could affect your entire career. I know, Sophia said quietly, and I've thought about that. But Vincent, I've also thought about what we could accomplish together, about the people we could help and the difference we could make. She paused, then continued with quiet intensity. I've spent my career treating symptoms. This would be a chance to actually heal people. Vincent pulled her closer, overwhelmed by the scope of her vision and the trust she was placing in him. You realize this would change everything. Our relationship, my business, your career. Everything would be different. Sophia smiled, the expression radiant with possibility. Vincent, everything is already different. We're already building something together that neither of us could create alone. This would just be the next step. He kissed her then, a kiss that tasted like coffee and possibility and the future they were choosing to build together. Outside their window, the city was waking up, 8 million people starting another day, most of them unaware that two unlikely partners were planning to change how society cared for its wounded. Later, as they sat over breakfast with Alessandro, discussing plans for the day with the easy affection of a family, Vincent realized that Sophia had been right about something fundamental. They were going to be okay. Not perfect, as she'd said that day in the hospital garden, but okay. Maybe even happy. And in Vincent Romano's world, where happiness was often considered a luxury too dangerous to pursue, that was nothing short of miraculous. The story would continue, Vincent knew. There would be new challenges, unexpected dangers, moments when the differences between their worlds created problems they'd have to solve together. But they would solve them together. Sofia Martinez had taught him that love wasn't about eliminating risk or controlling outcomes. It was about choosing to build something worthwhile despite the uncertainties. As he watched Sofia laugh at something Alessandro had said, as he felt the warm certainty of her hand in his, Vincent realized he'd finally learned the difference between surviving and living. And for the first time in his adult life, he was doing both. You know what happens next, he thought to himself, remembering her words from months ago. We keep building. We keep choosing each other. We keep believing that two people from impossible worlds can create something extraordinary together. And somewhere in the back of his mind, he could already see the groundbreaking ceremony for the new trauma center. Could imagine the ribbon-cutting ceremony, where Sofia would stand beside him as they opened doors to a facility that would serve anyone who'd been broken by violence and needed help becoming whole again. It would be complicated. It would be challenging. It would require navigation of bureaucratic, legal, and criminal considerations that would test both their skills and their relationship. But it would also be theirs, built together, sustained by love, and dedicated to the radical idea that healing was possible for anyone brave enough to try. Vincent Romano had spent his life managing darkness. Sofia Martinez had spent hers bringing light to difficult places. Together, they were discovering that sometimes the most powerful thing two people could do was meet in the space between those worlds and build something neither could achieve alone. The trauma center would be just the beginning.